Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the SD WAN Show, produced by Globestream Media. I am your host, Aaron Bock with Opkalla. We're headquartered out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And today we're going to be talking about all things SD WAN. I want to introduce the panelists who we have on the show today. Really excited to have them. So without further ado, I want to first introduce Niko O'Hara from Avant, Director of Engineering, focusing on SD-WAN, backup, and security for Avant. Next up, we've got Nick Schroeter from MetTel. Nick is a senior solution architect and responsible for helping customers design the best network they can. We've got Paul Summers from MetTel as well, senior channel manager. Paul's been in the telecom industry for 19 years, and his focus is on SD-WAN and mobility with MetTel. So how are you guys doing today?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Aaron.
So today we're going to be talking about SD-WAN. And so before we get into the Q&A, I just wanted to share a couple stats and then tell you guys a little bit about what Opkalla is doing in the SD-WAN space, what we're seeing, and then we're going to jump into a Q&A. So two quick stats for you all. IDC says that SD-WAN technology will grow at 30.8% annual growth from 2018 to 2023, and will reach 5.25 billion by 2023. And then Cisco, in its latest VNI study done in 2018, says that SD-WAN traffic was 9% of business IP WAN traffic in 2017, and will be 30% of business IP WAN traffic by 2022. So there's a lot of growth in this space. And so, like I mentioned, at Opkalla, we are a trusted advisor. We focus on helping our customers find the right technology with being agnostic, helping them get through the sales and buying process as fast as possible, and provide as much transparency. And so we help our customers commonly on this SD-WAN journey, and it's a confusing one. And so what I want to do is talk with these guys today about how is Avant and MetTel helping their customers on the SD-WAN journey? Why is this so confusing? And what do you guys see as the next step? So let's start with Niko. So Niko, can you tell us a little bit about what Avant is doing to help customers and solution providers with the SD-WAN journey? And what is your primary focus at Avant?
Sure. So Avant, we're kind of, a distributor or sort of a master agent, even though we hate that term, but we represent a vast portfolio of solution providers, dozens of vendors in the SD-WAN space, and really our advantage to trusted advisors such as yourself, Aaron, and to end customers is just our agnostic approach. We're not tied to any specific solution provider. We've got a bunch of engineers, including myself. There's a team of 5 that I manage, and then there's several other engineering directors spread across the country. And we specialize in various different areas, but including SD-WAN, we've got several on that team. And really, backing that up, we've got experience across hundreds of projects, some really large deals that we've closed with MetTel as well. So we're going to kind of come in and help, the seller to gather the right information, from the beginning, leveraging our interactive quick assessments or IQAs, help to get that conversation started, and then, from there down select to really the right providers that make sense for a given opportunity, and leverage a lot of our competitive intel, our matrices that we've developed that sort of compare different providers and provide that industry analysis. So we're kind of here to serve as sort of, I said agnostic, but I'll say it again, sort of an agnostic resource to help gather requirements and then, make the right solution recommendations, and help with the design along the way.
Perfect. Thanks, Niko. Let's jump to Paul. So Paul, tell us a little bit about MetTel and what you do specifically and what MetTel is doing in the SD-WAN space and beyond.
Yeah, great. No, I definitely appreciate that. And so MetTel, on a high level, we've been around since '96. Really started as a POTS aggregator, but have had exponential growth over the last 13 years, double-digit revenue growth, which is great for us. We are an SD-WAN provider. We're actually the largest supporter or deployer of managed Velo endpoints, which we're very, very proud of. And so my role is really to work with partners and with customers to help find the right solution for the customers and engage resources like our engineering team. We like to look at ourselves, a lot of people look at us as aggregators. We look at ourselves as aggregators plus technology gives us the ability to provide our customers with all the solutions they need, including SD-WAN and above and beyond. So I definitely appreciate that.
Thanks, Paul. So let's jump into the SD-WAN portion, and I'm calling it that. We've already been talking about it a little bit, but what we're going to do is we're going to try to take it from a high level of why SD-WAN and some of the challenges, and then we're going to jump into a little bit more specific. So let's start with Niko, and then we're going to go to Nick after this. So Niko, from your perspective with Avant, why is SD-WAN so popular right now? And what are the, I guess, general or trends that you're seeing in the industry?
Sure. So that's a question that I could answer for 15 minutes. I'll try to give you a quicker answer than that. But some of the initial drivers for SD-WAN are still very true today. The move to more and more cloud applications that are hosted, whether they're SaaS or in AWS or Azure, more applications outside of the data center means that a legacy network approach where you've got sort of a centralized hub for all internet access and everything backhauls to a data center just isn't efficient anymore. Do you want to push application traffic out locally? You want to be able to recognize and access those cloud applications as quickly as possible. And SD-WAN enables you to do that. The performance of the network and mitigating outages, downtime, whether it's blackouts or brownouts, is another key factor with SD-WAN, especially globally, where performance isn't as reliable as it is within the US. And then, cost savings is always part of the discussion. I wouldn't say it's the deciding factor, but it always comes into play one way or another. And network refreshes, hardware refreshes, again, are often a factor that just, you can't help but look at SD-WAN if you're replacing your carrier or replacing hardware within the network. So beyond that, some of the more recent trends that we're seeing, SASE, you can't avoid mentioning that nowadays with Gartner pushing that term, but really it's sort of the integration or the convergence of network and security functionality. So we continue to have more and more conversations around the WAN as a whole from the security and the SD-WAN perspective. And then lastly, I'll maybe mention just COVID and work from home. It's becoming prevalent for almost every customer, and trying to figure out how do we incorporate remote users or mobile users into our network and apply the same policies from an application performance perspective and a security perspective to those users. And it's not something that SD-WAN was necessarily built to do. So it is interesting to see how solution providers are addressing that, whether they're augmenting their SD-WAN solution or whether the SD-WAN vendor themselves is sort of adding that functionality. But it's definitely something that I think we'll continue to see moving forward.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, and I'd add to that. I did not expect. I think I did not expect the SD-WAN conversation to continue as fast as it has in 2020. But with COVID, you mentioned, I think more people are evaluating. Well, we've got these expensive connections into buildings that we're not using. So how do we change our network to adapt to what may be the new norm for a while? So I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing, Niko. Nick, let's kind of go to you. Same question, I guess. What do you see from the MetTel perspective? What's so popular about SD-WAN? Maybe from a higher level perspective, or organization top-down, CEO, CFO level. Like, why is it so popular right now?
Yeah, sure. And thanks again, Aaron, for having me. So let's start out with the non-technical folks. Alluding to Niko as well, one of the biggest reasons I have seen is definitely cost, right? Would be for the non-technical folks, having the ability to replace your expensive MPLS circuits or utilizing a DIA circuit with lesser bandwidth and coupling it with a low-cost broadband circuit while still having super fast and secure access to your corporate apps, whether in a co-location or a public data center, is causing a huge push to move to SD-WAN in the market. I'd also say employee productivity is another one. Being able to provide and prioritize applications and even sub-applications across multiple circuits, aggregate the bandwidth, and even deprioritize non-essential applications or websites. being able to kind of steer that traffic at a sub-second time frame to maximize the performance of your business critical applications. I think finally, I'd say that SD-WAN is also risk averse, being able to have that sub-second failover to a secondary or tertiary circuit, and in some circumstances, depending on the SD-WAN manufacturer, without even losing a phone call. And you couple that with the option for high availability hardware, it makes for a pretty compelling story. As far as the technical folks, I'd have to say things like packet-based versus flow-based. That's a huge term that everybody needs to understand, at least from a high level if you're technical, and because it's a huge defining factor in what you're going to do with your SD-WAN. At a high level, you have flow-based and packet-based. If it's flow-based, that means that if you have multiple circuits connected to your SD-WAN edge, and you're having a phone call or a real-time application like video, things of that nature on one circuit, and that circuit goes down, you have to understand that if it's flow-based, that flow needs to be reestablished on the other end. So what does that mean for your customer? That means that the network sort of has to reconverge. So you'll go down for a little bit while it reconverges on the other circuit. If it's packet-based, that means that it's not really looking at the TCP flow in and of itself. At a sub-second pace, it's steering and aggregating the packets between those links at a sub-second time frame, packet by packet. I'd also have to say that visibility into the network, management, inside your network as well, and of course scalability. Just real quick on scalability, just kind of a success story. I had a deployment where I did the design and architecture for over 1,000 locations, and this company was growing not organically, but by just acquisition over and over again. And so the IT director, his hair was always on fire because he had to take this brand new network that his boss is saying, hey, you have this deadline to get this network integrated to our network, all the applications, make sure that everything is running up to snuff and all the security policies are placed. Well, and again, depending on the certain SD-WAN manufacturer, it's very easy and quick to deploy on a template-based type of approach, right? So you can build the templates, say, okay, I want these applications prioritized, these ones deprioritized, get all that in line, right? And then deploy that to all the edges. And in the instance of MetTel using VeloCloud, those circuits will be auto-recognized. You might need to program an IP address if you have a static IP, but the point is very low configuration where you get the circuit up and running, and then it pushes down all the configuration from the orchestrator and the cloud gateways in order to get that customer up extremely quick.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, and there's actually something in there that you talked about, and I want to go to Paul next. But one of the things that you mentioned, replacing MPLS networks and going to SD-WAN. And so, Paul, I know from the sales side, right, you're dealing with the why SD-WAN conversations, and I think a lot of it is generated from a legacy, MPLS network or older. So, what are you seeing, I guess, as key factors when they're looking at SD-WAN? Is there a driver? Is there something that's causing this conversation to come up? Maybe it's cost, maybe it's a contract. What are you seeing from your perspective on the sales side?
Yeah, and thank you, and that's a great question. A lot of times people are looking at cost, trying to make things more efficient for them, but they're also understanding that technology changes. One of the biggest drivers that we're seeing from our customers, though, on a regular basis, is the move to the cloud. People are moving their environments off the cloud. People are moving in or off the premise into the cloud. And those things have more costs. They're not just replacing servers every 7 or 8 years. They're moving into Azure or Rackspace or AWS. They're moving their phones to the cloud. So the driver's cost, I think Niko referenced earlier, sometimes it's cost, but there's other factors that definitely drive that. And the biggest one is the cloud environments. Kind of piggybacking on what Nick said just a little while ago, or I think it was Niko, I'm sorry, this pandemic has caused a shift to remote employees that need to have access. And, in order to keep your network continuity, you're not going to, or it gets real expensive to deploy an MPLS circuit into every single SaaS provider that you might be using, where you can do that much more effectively, using an SD-WAN solution. So, cost is a kind of a broad term. A lot of our specific customers look at us because of experience, and that's something that I think customers are really looking at, because SD-WAN is still a relatively new technology. We were recognized by Gartner for our SD-WAN deployment and how we do that. Having that experience. We're on the GSA. We service the federal government. There's a lot of great SD-WAN providers out there, and there's multiple flavors. And there's even within the Velo space, there's several different ways that people develop or deploy that environment. So when customers are having this conversation, it's about, the underlying factor is typically about cost, or retiring hardware, or retiring or contracts ending. But it becomes a very broad conversation when we're talking to these customers to really understand, what it is that their end result is. Because a lot of times, most times, I've seen very few times that the cost is higher for SD-WAN. Usually it's substantially lower. So then it becomes, what does your perfect network now plus your perfect network down the road look like, to build that right solution for the customer.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, Paul. And I guess let's kind of play devil's advocate to our own comments, because I think we've talked about how SD-WAN can help an organization. Niko, let's go to you. So if there are objections to SD-WAN, so whether it be from a technical perspective or maybe a business perspective, what are those objections that you're seeing, and are they valid? Where is maybe SD-WAN not a good fit if there is a place? So what are you seeing from your side?
Yeah, we definitely see a lot of objections, and in most cases, we do our best to overcome those, and sometimes, you just can't. There's definitely cases where it's just not a good fit. But the one that we see a lot is, or I guess maybe the top two, SD-WAN isn't secure, and that's kind of it may not be true, right? And depending on the SD-WAN solution, you're going to get varying levels of security, either inherently built in or via partnership, or leveraging the existing, firewall technology, for example, that the client has. But that's sort of a perception out there that, SD-WAN, I'm leveraging the public internet, it's not secure. And in many cases, the client needs to be aware that, hey, we're actually adding, AES 128 or 256-bit encryption from site to site. We've got authorization protocols so that when you add SD-WAN devices to your network, they authenticate to your controller, and nobody can get into your network without going through a lot of steps to kind of break down that security that, in many cases might be more than what you had before. And on a private network like MPLS, you probably didn't even have encryption running across that network. So in many cases, that's something that we can kind of combat. But certainly, if the client wants really that next gen firewall functionality at every site, there are some SD-WAN solutions where it may not make sense to do that, and you'd want to look at others. So again, uncovering those requirements is certainly something that's really crucial to having that conversation. But that's a big one that we get. I'll kind of quickly swing through a couple others, and then we can go back to any of those as needed. But some of the other ones that we see are, they're currently in a contract with a carrier. They don't want to look at SD-WAN right now because they already signed a 3-year agreement. Maybe they're only in year 1. Or, for example, they might say we're in an active, or we don't need an active network right now. We've got active passive, or maybe we just have an active network and that's all we have. And for whatever reason, because of the criticality of the applications that we're running, it just might not be that important to us. We don't need it. Or maybe there's just not even availability or diversity available to us based on the locations that we have. Maybe they're job sites or small shops in really rural locations, and we can't even find 2 diverse circuits to begin with. So we're not going to go to the trouble of finding those, maybe at significant expense, and then adding SD-WAN on top of that. And that last piece that I touched on is another one that we sometimes get, just the expense of SD-WAN. And there is an expense to it. The cost savings are typically coming from that circuit replacement element. moving potentially from a private network to a public network, maybe adding significant bandwidth when doing that, and moving to that more cost-effective circuit. But for those clients that are maybe in the network contract, and that's already a private network commitment, if you're going to look at adding SD-WAN to that network as it stands today, you really are adding cost in that scenario. So if they don't buy into the benefits of SD-WAN, from a simplified management perspective, adding the visibility, adding the resilience to make the networks that you have active, and not be solely reliant on any one network, being able to access your cloud applications more efficiently. If they don't buy into those things and they're really looking at it, from purely a cost savings perspective, then there are times where it's just not going to be the right fit. And that's a customer that you maybe want to revisit 1 or 2 years down the line where, that they're a little more amenable to that conversation. But there are certainly times, like you alluded to, where we talk to a client and it's just, we mutually agree, all right, let's not force this issue any further. We can come back and talk about it down the road.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing. I would agree. I mean, I think where at Opkalla we see maybe the customer that's the least ready for SD-WAN or has the most objections is the one that maybe isn't looking that far into the future. Everything is kind of running today fine. They're not really considering what it might look like in 3 to 4 years. And I hate to keep going back to this pandemic that we're going through, but I think we've seen a lot of things change from this work from home environment. And it's also changing the way, for example, if you have salespeople in the field, how are your salespeople doing calls and say they're selling on video and the video quality is not great? Maybe that was never an issue before. And so I think where we see at Opkalla the biggest objection is they're just not ready for it yet. So, thanks for sharing, Niko. I think those are good points. So the next piece I want to kind of go through, and I'm going to share from the Opkalla perspective. So in our experience, what we have seen is there's really 3, I guess, levels or layers, however you want to, maybe 3 progressions of buying SD-WAN. So the first one is, why do I switch to SD-WAN at all, right? And we've kind of talked about why SD-WAN, some of the benefits. The second kind of layer, once we get past why SD-WAN, is what technology within SD-WAN do I use? How do I pick, et cetera? And then the third being, do I have it managed or do I manage it myself? And so, Niko, I want to go back to you for a second because, at Avant, you guys are working with all the different technologies. So, how do you see the customers start the evaluation of SD-WAN technology once they've gotten past the, okay, why SD-WAN question?
Yeah, so that's a great point that you brought up, and that is a lot of what Avant does or tries to do for clients is help them to make both that technology selection as well as, that managed services or that actual, solution provider decision as well. So it's a wide variety of requirements and sort of data points that we try to gather to help make that decision. And again, this is something that just based on time, I'm not going to go fully into, but at a high level, at least from the technology perspective, we want to understand, what is your current state? What are we working with right now? And what's that future state? Like you talked about, let's look forward a couple of years into the future and figure out where you want to be so that we don't put in a solution today that a year from now is already outdated, based on what you've done or what you wanted to do from an application, network, and security perspective. So we want to understand, to some level, the carrier contracts that they're in, the geography, the locations of these sites to understand, depending on the architecture of the solution that we propose, that it's able to support the vast, spread of their sites, or, it's a more regional deployment, and also understanding, from an acquisition and a growth perspective, where are you looking to go down the line? It might be domestic now, but they're planning to open up branches in, EMEA, and we need to plan for that too, or hopefully we are. So that's part of the discussion. And then as Nick alluded to earlier, understanding, for example, getting into the weeds of how the solution actually works. We want to know what their key applications are, where those are hosted, whether they're IaaS or SaaS, and really, how those applications perform, how they work, because to his point, if it's packet protection, for example, voice or video are really crucial for that client, then we want to be able to do things like duplicate packets or provide forward error correction so that voice call stays up and running, even when maybe there's a failover from link A to link B. Even when there's a brownout, we can still provide consistent and seamless performance. And then understanding from there, all right, well, is that PBX hosted on premises? In which case, putting an SD-WAN device at site A and site B is sufficient. Or is that a cloud-based voice solution, in which case you can put an SD-WAN device at site A and site B, but the voice is actually hosted in the cloud somewhere, and you maybe can't put an SD-WAN device in that data center. So then we're looking at things like gateways or POPs hosted by the SD-WAN solution provider, and that's really a big factor as we start to talk about really the architecture and the deployment, because customers often think, just based on what they're hearing from solution providers, that SD-WAN is going to provide all this functionality for me, going to keep my calls up and running. And the truth is, depending on where those calls are coming from, where those applications are hosted, that's not always going to be the case. So that's a lot of there's a lot of mismarketing out there that we're trying to help clients sort of sift through and dig into what's really important and what's really going to work for their network. So whether it's the applications or the security requirements or specific technical features that they're looking for, I think as we dive into those things, work from home users is another one. Just understanding how we're going to address their requirements and their needs. So I'll pause there because I could go on for a very long time. So I addressed the technology selection piece. And if you want to get into the managed services part, I'm more than game to do that as well.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing that. And I think, you're right. We could probably talk for a day. And I think I have talked to you for almost a day at points on why certain SD-WAN technologies. But let's jump over to Nick. So, Nick, well, I guess the first part was why the technology. The second part is, do you manage it yourself? How do you decide whether your organization is able to handle that? So maybe you can take that portion of the question. How do you help someone, and where do you guys kind of spend time helping them understand the importance of management of the SD-WAN once it's actually installed?
Yeah, that's a good question as well, Aaron. Keep them coming. So yeah, the management of the SD-WAN network. So of course, MetTel's approach on that as well is, we will have it fully managed. It can be co-managed, or we can give you the keys to the kingdom, and we give you full read-write access to the orchestrator in this case. And it is extremely important to know what applications are running on your network. And there's a lot of approaches where you can even put an SD-WAN device in there and let it run for a little bit and actually just see all the applications that are running on there. A lot of the times people don't even know, and they're having voice issues, or some applications aren't performing like they're supposed to, and it's as simple as someone goes on break and watches Netflix or something along those lines. I see that all the time. And so you want to make sure that you have ease of management, though. That's a big key, and I think the SD-WAN manufacturers are getting they're getting pretty good at it. It's no longer really an infancy stage. It's still new, don't get me wrong, but they're starting to come around with that management. In the case of MetTel with VeloCloud, right, you get everything's point and click. You don't have to be a CCIE, with all the geek knobs and everything like that, and wonder about SNMP flows and looking at OIDs and MIBs and net flow statistics, all these geeky terms, right? You can just go in there, you look, it has the applications, it doesn't have ports or anything like that. You can just say, okay, here's my users, this is what they're doing. I can see my bandwidth very easily, so you can see the applications. You can see the applications that are using that bandwidth, and then you can see the users that are using that applications that are using that bandwidth.
Love the abbreviations. You may have confused all the parents at home. No. Nick, back to you. One other quick question on that. So
Sure.
You mentioned Velo, and we haven't really talked about VeloCloud specifically, but so MetTel is one of the largest VeloCloud managed service providers in the country. Why Velo, and what is the advantage of Velo, and where do you see Velo being a fit for almost anyone?
Yeah, that's an excellent question again. So I have to start off by saying, so MetTel got in the game really early on with VeloCloud, and VMware VeloCloud is the most successful and largest SD-WAN manufacturer out there. This isn't just my opinion. You can look at any Gartner report, that's out there, and you consistently see VeloCloud way out in front. MetTel chose VeloCloud for its tried and true ability to be scalable, its inherent visibility, It's easy to use management, and its integrations, and its real life ability to have that sub-second failover that's not just talk. It really works. I always like to say this quick story about I was at a conference one time running the tech booth, and so we had, a VeloCloud Edge out there. We sponsored Viasat to put satellite on the roof, and then we had an AT&T LTE modem and a Verizon LTE modem. So it was actually 2 LTE modems for wireless connections in the satellite, and we ran a VoIP phone. This time it was actually behind Ring Central. This was a while ago, but the point is that we would have a call placed on there, and it was on hold, so you could hear hold music. And I'd have customers, potential customers and partners, sub-agents come up, and they're hearing the music and come and rip the internet right out of the back of the box in real time, and they're all shaking and scared about it. And they'd rip the internet out, and there's not a blip. It just keeps on going. And they can visually see that the circuit is down. And so, it's a good example of how that really, it is tried and true, and it actually works. So how does it accomplish this? Niko talked about this as well, so I'll just make it brief. But there's packet by packet aggregation, right? Again, it's about that packet based versus flow based. Forward error correction, Niko mentioned that as well, right? The ability to mitigate packet loss. A lot of these IT guys out there that are used to data, right? TCP is very forgiving. If a packet doesn't get transmitted over the other side, it just retransmits the packet until it gets there. We don't have that luxury in real-time applications like voice and video. And so with forward error correction, you have an ability to mitigate packet loss, and then you couple that with packet duplication, which is the ability to send out packets in the case that there's a degraded link on link A. You can duplicate those packets to link B and send them to their destination. First come, first serve gets to process that packet. I'd say that MetTel has a unique approach, because not only do we have our own private gateways in each of our 9 super pops, but we have our own IP space from our end. And so we can give you a public routable subnet for your location network while giving you all the inherent benefits that VeloCloud, the platform, brings in and of itself.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it. And, I think, I know I asked you before the show if you could just keep it high level. I know you could go for another hour on the technical benefits of VeloCloud.
Yes.
I know you can't, but I appreciate you sharing high level. Let's jump to Paul for a second. So Paul, let's take a break from the technical speak, and let's just talk a little bit about the sales cycle, if you will, about SD-WAN. So we kind of talked about, why SD-WAN, and then it's the technology behind it. But you're on the sales side, and so you talk to customers every day about their journey to SD-WAN. So what do you see is the sales cycle? Like, how does it typically go? Where does it start? Where do you see the driving factor of like, okay, we're going to move forward at this point?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so one of the things we find to be the absolute most successful is, spending a few minutes understanding what the customer currently has, right? If we can simplify their network a little bit, or we can take their exact same setup and just shift it just a little bit, while making the transition real smooth, understanding that initial process is, understanding their initial environment is super critical, and that helps. Straight up numbers, we've had 5 and 6 figure deals with a 30-day sales cycle. If customers know they want it, or they understand and see the value very quickly, it can be a very quick sale. We have some larger deals that take months as well. It just depends on the organization a little bit. But the quicker that customers see the value of the solution and realize, wow, well, this will be a little painful doing some initial IP readdressing, but once it's done, we will never have to change that again, and it can be a real smooth transition. Is great. One of the things we pride ourselves, at least here at MetTel, is our engineers really take into account dealing with the transition. It can be a bit of a process to transition from MPLS to SD-WAN, and a lot of times there's contract dates that don't match up. So that impacts the sales cycle a little bit, but a quick sales cycle might be 30 days, and a long sales cycle might be 3 or 4 months, which is still not a terribly long sales cycle. So that's helpful.
Do you see, and this is just really a quick response, Paul, but do you see that Is it usually the time for like your ISP circuit renewal driving, or is it you mentioned earlier move to the cloud, or maybe it's a firewall that is coming up on an expiration date? Do you see any one of those being the main factor in most of your opportunities, or is it just kind of a combination?
Circuit dates help. I mean, obviously those are a lot of those termination fees are going to be, the entire balance of an account. But I've also had customers who say, I'll just pay it to make this move, to simplify their life and their environment. So I think there's typically a network change, be it a circuit's coming out of a contract, or you made a good point. Firewalls need to be replaced. These conversations happen because a lot of times customers will do SD WAN and replace firewalls and move those to the cloud or things like that. So that's why we like to have that initial real in-depth discovery kind of conversation to understand what they have, where they're going. That way it's not just fixing what they need now, but also looking at the future and kind of future-proofing the environment.
Awesome, thanks. So we're going to kind of wrap up here, but a couple of final questions. So let's go over to Niko. Niko, you kind of talked about it earlier, so I don't want to belabor the point, but want to talk about what the future of SD-WAN looks like. And you mentioned SASE, you mentioned security at the edge. So, where do you see SD-WAN in the near-term future, long-term? What are some of your predictions that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think we did touch on it earlier, and I don't want to rehash it too much, but in addition to the point we talked about with SASE, just feature consolidation in general, right? A lot of the network functionality converging with the security functionality, technologies like WAN optimization, which potentially had their heyday. They may have a much more limited use case now than they did historically, but things like WAN op, routing, converging with security functionality, and the whole SASE model. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Vendors like Zscaler and Palo Alto from the security side are really coming after SD-WAN to sort of fit that description from Gartner for SASE. And on the flip side, you've got SD-WAN providers who are trying to do the same and sort of meet in the middle. So I do think that's more of a framework, if anything. I don't think we can necessarily try to look at it and pick vendors' offerings apart and say, this technically is SASE and this technically isn't. I think it's a good guideline to shoot for, and providers are going to get there different ways. But we'll continue to see that. We'll continue to see, also consolidation from a vendor perspective. You've obviously seen VMware and Cisco go out and purchase market leaders. We've seen the same recently from Palo Alto acquiring CloudGenix and HPE acquiring Silver Peak. So last year, there were probably about 20 providers in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for WAN edge infrastructure. And, I'm not sure if they'll publish one this year or next year, but there might be, 10. And a year from now, maybe there's 6 or 7 really serious players. And everyone else who kind of said, oh, hey, we also do SD-WAN, might not be that relevant anymore. And going back, I also missed Oracle acquiring Talari, so I should mention that one as well. But the last couple of trends, maybe that I think we'll see, we're seeing already, but just more and more of a shift away from, that sort of legacy hub and spoke private network to more of a public internet-based network. And I don't know that that's, necessarily a very bold claim to make, but there's certainly a resistance to that today by many organizations. I think we'll continue to see kind of those barriers break down and start to see that a little more globally where we haven't necessarily seen it as much. And maybe also just from a COVID, and work from home perspective, I think, kind of coupled with SASE a little bit, but we'll start to see more and more of a focus on that end user, especially as, the corporate office becomes maybe outdated or, much more or much less rather significant than it used to be. So I think that's something that we'll see SD-WAN providers need to focus on, because if they don't, they might not be as relevant as they were before.
Yeah, I agree with you. And let's go over to Nick. So Nick, I think same thing from your perspective. Niko hit on a lot of points there, and so not to double up, but from your perspective with MetTel's future and how MetTel sees their customer changing over the next couple of years, what do you see?
Yeah. So with MetTel and how that fits in, big push is everything going to the cloud, right? And so we're very good at transitioning these legacy networks from MPLS over to SD-WAN as well, but you can't negate the importance of cloud application. That's not going anywhere but straight up, and it's exponential growth. And so, in talking about that, we have our Cloud Connect product, right, which is an on-ramp into your Azure, AWS, things of that nature, coupled with because we are an aggregator, which it's funny that Niko mentioned the term about master agency he doesn't like. We don't like using the word aggregator as well, mainly because a lot of times that just means that you resell wholesale circuits. We have a very, very strong network backbone that we're very proud of. We have our private gateways in all 9 of our super pops. I do want to talk about that just a little bit. Each one of our super pops is highly redundant. We have East Cage, West Cage redundancy, where all of our cloud gateways go, our cloud firewall, hosted PBX, all of our services that we offer are in the East Cage and the West Cage. And because we have NNIs with all of our underlying carriers, we're able to, really streamline that process of getting not just from the local loop, but also your SaaS applications, things of that nature that are in public clouds. We have visibility and manageability and control, much further upstream from its packet birth to a packet death. So I think that's extremely important. The other thing that I'd like to talk about, if I could, is our ability to kind of consolidate a lot of these things and still come out with the same goal. And one of those would be, we're seeing copper-based lines go away, right? So copper is basically all the carriers are saying we're not going to support copper anymore. So we have another product that we have out there it's called POTS in a Box, which not only gets rid of your copper lines by fully supporting and UL certified for fire alarm, burglar alarm, elevator, life safety lines, things of that nature, but it also has dual SIM Category 4 radio LTE in it. So you have a secondary or tertiary circuit that you can place coupled with our SD-WAN, get rid of your copper lines, right? And also be able to have, a fast throughput LTE backup as one of your connections. And sometimes it's a tertiary connection in that case. And so, it's just an example of consolidating technologies, looking where the industry is going, following that in some aspects, but more importantly, actually leading that and just making sure that all of our customers are taken care of here and in the future.
Yeah, and I agree. I'm glad you hit on the consolidation point. We're seeing it with our customers. The more they can consolidate, the better. I've also shared with my team multiple times. I said, we're selling this now, and this is our recommendation now, but who knows where we'll be in 3 years. You talked a little bit about LTE.
Absolutely.
And about, we might be talking 5G is the new norm instead of coax in a couple years. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I do think consolidation is something that you're going to see more and more in the future with just how many software platforms there are, how many different cloud technologies, et cetera. So, but thanks for sharing, guys, today. So, Niko, let's wrap up here, and we'll start with you. What is the easiest way for folks to reach out to you and the Avant team?
Yeah, so I think, like you said a little bit, we touched on it earlier, but really just reach out to us. We'll help. We've got tools and conversation starters, and we can do trainings around SD-WAN to help our trusted advisors to really become confident enough in SD-WAN to at least have that conversation. Fill out an IQA, an interactive quick assessment, which is guided. It's built as sort of a guided script almost, but just to gather that information from a client so that we can start to analyze it and maybe recommend a couple providers if it's relatively obvious, or if not, get on a phone call with an engineer like myself to really dive into those requirements and understand, what is driving this customer to SD-WAN and what solutions and solution providers might be, really the best fit or best suited to meet those requirements holistically, including, their circuit strategy and their UCaaS strategy, and trying to have as much of an encompassing conversation as we can. And then, bringing in those providers and helping to keep them honest and make sure those proposals are apples to apples, if you will, and then helping to, sort of review as needed and really push that deal forward. And obviously, a lot of that I'm sure is really similar to exactly what Opkalla is doing, in partnership with Avant. So to really summarize it, we're here to kind of give you that agnostic guidance and leverage our experience and our engineers to help, push that deal forward and get you matched up with the right solutions.
Thanks, Niko. And then, Nick, we'll start with you. From MetTel's perspective, I know we talked a little bit today about the Velo Cloud appliance and how you guys are helping your customer deploy it. What is your suggestion maybe to the technical person in the room who's trying to start this SD-WAN journey? What's the best way for them to start, or what's the easiest way for them to get MetTel involved in that process to begin?
Yeah, so the easiest way to get MetTel involved is obviously talk to a partner, like yourself or one of our agent channel managers like Paul. But I would like to say that the first step in the organizational process should be know what you want to get out of the SD-WAN, right? Have a good baseline. Try to do some of your own research. But then in the MetTel world, once you get a hold of us, we walk you through that from beginning to end. You have a dedicated project manager. You have dedicated implementation engineers, dedicated architect like myself, dedicated salesperson like Paul, customer care, right, for afterwards. You get your own 800 number. You get your own email address for MetTel, things of that nature. So we really give you that white glove experience, not only during the install process, but more importantly afterwards. So that sales process is seamless, and then you just feel like you're MetTel's only customer throughout that entire process. That's really how we try to make the customers feel.
Thanks, Nick. And Paul, I think you would agree, and I'm going to, just for the sake of time, I'm going to wrap up here, but I think, I really appreciate you all being on the show today. I think there was some great conversation, great topic around SD-WAN. I would also add that Opkalla, we're having this conversation, if not daily, 10 times a day about SD-WAN and why SD-WAN. And so, please reach out. Our website, we have an assessment section where you can take an SD-WAN assessment, and it'll kind of guide you as your organization looks at this process and starting to go down the SD-WAN journey. And so reach out to anyone on here. I think that these are all knowledgeable folks. I want to thank Globestring Media for hosting the SD WAN show and allowing Opkalla and myself to host. And thank you guys for joining, and I hope everyone has a wonderful week.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us.
My pleasure. Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it.